brain in this image, okay? So, and you guys actually, of everybody in the group, you guys were able to bring together all three of these things. We're able to list these. So we have the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Okay, and we're going to go into pretty big detail on what each of these things do. Okay, so let's go first, the cerebrum. Does anybody have any guesses on what the cerebrum could do? You can send your guess in the chat. What do you think the cerebrum does? Okay, someone said it's the main part of the brain. Yeah, well, thinking, yes. The cerebrum is where thinking happens. It's the conscious thinking, yeah, thinking and control. Yeah, you guys are doing really good. Processes the four senses. I'm going to pause the chat again. But yeah, the cerebrum is where your thinking takes place. It's the most complex part of our brain, and parts of it are more developed in humans than in other animals. Like we have a really big frontal lobe, but I'll talk about that later. So that's our cerebrum. So let's talk about the cerebrum a little bit. It is the largest part of the brain, as you can see. As you can see in this diagram, it's by far the biggest part of the brain. Our cerebrum is way bigger than anything else we can think of, okay? So our cerebrum is the biggest, and it also has left and right hemispheres, right? So it's split in half, right down the middle here. And, we'll go into what the left and right hemispheres do later, but it's important to know it's the biggest part. It has a left half and a right half, and it controls, all of the things that you guys suggested earlier, including the senses, like touch, and vision, and hearing, and also the output that we create, like generating speech. That's controlled by the cerebrum. Conscious thought is controlled by the cerebrum. All of those things are functions of the cerebrum. All right, so now let's go back a little bit here, and let's think about the cerebellum. Do you guys think you have an idea what the cerebellum does? I'm going to open up the chat. Let me open this up here, all panelists. All right, so give me your best guess on what the cerebellum does. All right, so Liz said, all right, there's some balance. Some people are saying emotions, laughter, coordination, actions, breathing, or automatic functions. Wow, you guys know a lot for second and fourth graders. Jeez. It's okay if you guys don't know. I'm going to teach you. That's why I just want to see where you guys are at. It's good to give your best guess. All right, so I'm going to pause the chat for a second. Yeah, things like laughter and feelings. So you guys, there weren't 100% correct answers, but you guys got a lot of the right answers. So the cerebellum is located right under the cerebrum. If you look at my video here, cerebellum's going to be back here, like right there, right under your cerebrum. And what it does is it coordinates muscle movements, right? People are talking about motion and movement, maintains your posture, right? When you sit upright, the reason your body isn't just like slumped down is because your cerebellum is subconsciously controlling yourself to keep you upright and straight and postured. And also things balance, right? Like when you walk on a balance beam, your cerebellum's the one back there being like, don't fall over. And also, there's a couple emotional processes that the cerebellum has as well. While our really complex emotions are processed by the cerebrum, the cerebellum has some basal emotions, like our really basic emotions, like fear or anger or things like that. And so that is the cerebellum. So now let's go back to our big picture, and our last part of the brain here in our diagram is the brain stem. Okay, the brain stem is kind of nestled underneath the cerebrum and nestled right next to and a little bit underneath the cerebellum. So what do you guys think the brain stem does? Give me your best guess, and it's okay if you don't get it right. Just give me your best guess what the brain stem does. Oops. Someone said involuntary action. Someone said memories, holds the brain, keeps your brain sturdy. It's things like breathing, connects the nerves. Yeah, so there's a few pretty good answers. So I'm going to pause the chat right here. So a lot of people are saying things like connects to the spine and connects part of the brain. and, keeps, or I guess like delivers signals. Yeah, that's the biggest function of the brainstem, right? It's, oops, it acts as a relay center, right? It connects the cerebrum and cerebellum to the spinal cord, because our spinal cord receives a lot of different signals from all over our bodies, and it connects our big brain processing center to the stimulus inputs that we get all over our body. And I know those are a bunch of big words I'm throwing at you, but basically all you have to know is that the brainstem is the relay center for your nervous system, okay? It connects your thinking part of your brain, or it connects the thinking part of your body to the feeling part of your body. Okay, so it controls also a lot of automatic functions. And those are things that you don't think about. Automatic means they happen, without you purposefully making them happen. They just happen as a part of what your body naturally does. And that includes, controlling your breathing, right? Humans can consciously breathe. We can think about breathing and control it. Or, most of the time we don't think about breathing and it just happens. And another thing it controls is heart rate. Your heart can go really, really fast. Can go like 120 beats per minute, maybe even close to 200 if you're going for a really intense run. Or if you're sleeping, your heart rate will go down to like 50 or 60, or even lower if you're really athletic. And your brainstem is what controls your heart rate to deal with the level of activity that you're doing at that moment. It also controls your body temperature. Our bodies are like a cool, high 90s. We want to keep it around that temperature. If it's much higher, you get a fever. If it's much lower, your body isn't able to function very well. Our brainstem maintains our temperature. It also controls sleeping. You guys might not know this yet, but when you go to sleep, you go through a bunch of different sleep cycles. There are different kinds of sleep, and your brainstem controls how you cycle through those different kinds of sleep. There's a thing called REM sleep and deep sleep and light sleep. And all of those are important for different parts of, healing and recovery and resting. And your brainstem controls where you are in your sleep cycle. Okay, so all right, so the next thing is digestion. So digestion happens in your tummy, like down in your abdomen, down in your digestive tract. And we don't consciously control that, right? You don't think, oh, I ate carrots for dinner and now I'm gonna turn them all up in my stomach and then I'm gonna, squish them along in my digestive tract. You don't think that, but your brainstem controls it automatically. Your brainstem controls the muscle contractions that you need to digest your food. And there's things like sneezing and coughing and vomiting. Those are all, basically your body's responses to different kinds of inflammation and sickness. Sneezing gets rid of some kind of irritation in your nose. Coughing gets rid of some kind of irritation in your throat. And vomiting gets rid of, whatever's making you feel not so good in your stomach area. So those three things also controlled by the brainstem, also automatic. And the last thing is swallowing. So, when we're chewing food and you swallow it, you don't consciously think, I'm going to contract this muscle and this muscle and this muscle and this muscle. You instead have your brainstem kind of, figure that out. Okay. All right. So now let's take a look at the division between the left brain and the right brain, okay? So, as we mentioned before, and as many people mentioned, our brains are split up, or are really our cerebellum, so our cerebrum, I'm getting mixed up here, our cerebrum is split into a left brain and a right brain, okay? So, I want to ask you guys, what do you think the differences are between the left brain and the right brain? Give me your best ideas here. Just give me your best guess. It's okay if you don't know, but if you think you have an idea. So someone said left controls the right. Someone said, opposite parts. We use one more than the other. One is creative, one is not creative. Big one is they control different sides of the body. Some people are saying that, they control, different kind of functions. Yeah, someone said they have different functions. Yeah, someone also just said they do different stuff. Yeah, so you could argue that, and it's like a very traditional thought in psychology. That right and left brains do different things. So what we're going to discover here is that, one thing that is true, they control different sides of your body, as you can see in this diagram, right? If you look at this little guy on the screen, I'm also going to pause the chat here. If you look at this little guy on the screen, you can see that the blue side of his brain, his right brain, is controlling the blue side of his body, which is his left body. And same goes for the right side. So the right side of his brain, left side of his brain is controlling his right body. So let's go ahead and look at what the left hemisphere does. So the left hemisphere tends to control certain tasks. While you use your whole brain in most tasks, the left hemisphere tends to lean towards activities like speech and comprehension and arithmetic and writing. This is what people typically call your quote-unquote logical brain, right? This is the part of the brain that is, this is the part of the brain that is, more so about reasoning and things, stepwise thinking and things that are very clear cut. Everybody, how about everybody puts in the chat really quick, give me an example of something your left hemisphere would control. Think about logical activities. Math, yeah. Stories, math. Holding paper, math tests, statistics, puzzles, writing, riddles, science. Yeah, those are all great things. Okay, I'm going to pause the chat one more time. All right. So we have our left hemisphere doing our logical activities. And now let's think about what our right hemisphere does, okay? So in our right hemisphere, we have some different functions, all right? So our right hemisphere is more creative, right? It's our creative half of the brain. It's creativity, there's spatial ability, like how we perceive things existing in space. There's our artistic ability, right? Things like, making drawings or painting or sculpting. Those are all right hemisphere influenced activities, and musical skills. So how about you guys send me some messages now, give me an idea of what kind of activities, would come from the right hemisphere. Good, yeah. Music, painting, coloring, jumping. Oh, playing piano, hairstyles. Yeah, okay. Whistling, drawing, acting, architecture, instruments playing, piano. Dancing, violin. Yeah, I play violin too. So lovely. Good. All right, so I'm going to pause the chat really quick. Singing, playing guitar, flute, good, sculpting. Someone said coolness. Maybe coolness is controlled by your right brain. All right, so now we have to think about, some people, just as the same as you have your right-handed or your left-handed, some people are, brain-sided as well. So you could be left-brained or right-brained, and so a thing, one way you could figure this out is thinking about your brain hemispheres, right? We talked about how one side of the one brain hemisphere controls the opposite side's motor function. So when I move my right hand like this in the video, you see, moving more on my right hand, this side of my brain is actually controlling that. My left brain is controlling my right hand. And if I move around my left hand, my right brain, sorry, I'm getting my sides mixed up. My left brain controls my right hand, and my right brain controls my left hand, okay? So how we know this is that the left hemisphere is dominant in hand use and language in 92% of people. So you're probably right-handed, which means your left hemisphere is probably dominant, right? So let's open up the chat one more time, and I want you guys to tell me if you think you're right-brained or left-brained. All right, a lot of people are saying left. That makes sense because, 90% of people are left-brained. All right, good. All right, it seems like most people are here. Yeah, and so let me pause this really quick. So yeah, if you are righty, you're probably left-brained. If you're a lefty, you're probably right-brained. A couple of people are saying that they feel like it's both because they can do stuff on both sides, and that's the thing. Some people are ambidextrous. Ambidextrous means it means both sides equal. All right, so let's move on to our next slide here. And the next section of the brain that we're going to talk about is the corpus callosum, and that's it's a big old word, but the corpus callosum is essentially what connects the two hemispheres of the brain, right? You have your right hemisphere, you have your left hemisphere, but how do they talk to each other? They need to be connected, and they're connected through the corpus callosum. And it's made of a bundle of fibers between the two hemispheres of your brain, and it transmits messages from one side of your brain to the other side of your brain. Yes. And so when do you, let's think about this. Let's think a little bit critically here. When do you guys think you would especially need your corpus callosum to be used? Give me an example of an activity where you would really need your corpus callosum. And people are saying hockey and dancing and juggling and running. Yeah, there's a lot of answers here that involve doing physical activities that involve both sides of your body, definitely. And your body's going to need to communicate between the left and right sides of the hemispheres because when you're doing full body activity, you need to coordinate your whole body, right? You need to coordinate every single thing you're doing. And this is a little bit, I'm going to pause the chat one more time, sorry. I'll be honest with you guys, this is a little tiny bit of a trick question because actually you use your corpus callosum almost all of the time because, our brains are really complex. The things we do are really complex, and usually you're going to need to use both sides of your brain. All right. So corpus callosum, very, very important. All right, so now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the lobes of the brain. And there are 4 lobes of the brain. There are 4 main lobes. This is just a little diagram of your brain. This is a little too complicated for what we need to see, but I think it would be good for you guys to, maybe, hopefully you guys all have a pen and paper. And a good idea if you're taking notes would be just draw out this picture, right? Draw out the general shape of the brain. And block off the different areas for, this is the frontal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, this is the temporal lobe, and this is the occipital lobe. And I know those are big words. I know you guys are pretty young, and so you might not understand these words yet or really be familiar with these words. And you don't need to memorize this per se, but it's good to familiarize yourself with the different lobes of the brain. So the frontal is going to be right here at the front of my head. The parietal is going to be, kind of on the back-ish / middle. The temporal are going to be right by my ears, and the occipital is going to be at the back of my head, right above the cerebellum. Okay? So those are the different parts of our brain, and I'll give you guys another second here to try and draw it. And you don't need to worry about these other labeled areas, the Broca area, the Wernicke's area, motor strip, and sensory strip. You guys don't have to worry about those for now. We're only going to be examining the lobes for today. Okay. So how about you guys let's start out with all of you guys giving me your best guess on what the frontal lobe does. So open up the chat again. What do you guys think the frontal lobe does? It's okay if you don't know. You can just give me your best guess. Yeah, people get saying thinking and logic and reasoning and sight and decisions. Okay. I'm going to pause these. Does the most excited stuff. Yeah. Okay, so the frontal lobe is probably one of the more complex areas of our brain. The frontal lobe is really important. It's really what houses your personality and really, really complex thought. All right here. Humans have super developed frontal lobes, way more developed than other mammals. That's what makes us so smart. So, we have our frontal lobe, which controls personality, behavior, and emotions, particularly complex emotions. And it also helps with complex thinking tasks. For example, judgment and planning and problem solving. All those things that take a lot of your brain capacity. And you have to sit down and go, I need to take time to process that. All of those are going to be done by your frontal lobe. Conscious thought is done by your frontal lobe. Additionally, speech is processed in your frontal lobe in Broca's area. You don't need to know the specifics per se, but speech, has an important function in the frontal lobe. Some body movement is done in the frontal lobe as well. And, complex things like complex character traits, like your intelligence and your ability to concentrate, and have conscious thought. Like, you're thinking and you know that your brain is working. And things like self-awareness, right? Most animals don't have self-awareness. Most animals don't know that they're thinking or don't know about themselves. But humans are very unique in that we have very developed frontal lobes, and so we have all these intense cognitive functions like intelligence, concentration, and self-awareness. Okay, so let's go back a slide. And I want you guys to tell me, give me your best guess on what the, on what the parietal lobe does. Best guess for the parietal lobe. Some people are saying thinking and hearing and sensitivity, senses, hearing, gets messages. Okay, so a lot of different answers here, but let's go ahead and see what it does. So the parietal lobe does a lot of different stuff. I'd say it's pretty similar to the frontal lobe, but less complex. It does a lot of interpretation of our senses. So to start off, there is some interpretation of language and word in the parietal lobe. And there's also a sense of touch, right? Our sense of touch is very, very important to humans. We have very, very sensitive things like hands, and our skin is very sensitive. And so our parietal lobe is where we have that sense of touch and things like pain and temperature, right? For touch, we have pressure receptors on our fingers, and for pain, we have nociceptors, which are pain receptors. And for temperature, our bodies are very, very apt to notice differences in both our own temperatures and also the surrounding temperature, right? If it's cold outside, you can tell that, in a very small degree. Like, I'm sure you guys can, you might not know it consciously, but you can tell the difference between a room that is 70 degrees and a room that's 78 degrees. It's a pretty small difference. It's only 8 degrees, but our bodies are very sensitive to these things. Another thing the parietal lobe does is interpret all of our senses, including vision, sight, hearing, sound, motor, moving around, senses, and our memory, right? So, there's a lot of things that are done in the parietal lobe, including intaking sensory information. And another thing done in the parietal lobe is spatial and visual perception, okay? So spatial and visual perception are things like, looking around and understanding what things are in space, right? So like, I have my cup in front of me, and it's my parietal lobe that tells me my cup is about, like a foot away from me. That's what it's telling me right now. So that's, those are the basics of our parietal lobe. So, oops, oh God, I hope you didn't see that. So give me your best guess on what the occipital lobe does. The occipital lobe, so that's the one. I opened up the chat, guys. Occipital lobe, it's all the way in the back here, remember? All the way in the back of our head. right above our cerebellum. It's the bottom backmost part of your cerebrum. So let's get some more guesses about the occipital lobe. Really, I love participation. So hit me up with those occipital lobe guesses. Someone said not really much. That's very funny. Vision, colors, sight. Yeah. I think you guys are on the right track. You guys know so much. You guys know way more than I did in elementary school about brains. I knew nothing about brains in elementary school. All right, so let's go to the occipital lobe. Basically, the biggest thing that the occipital lobe does is interpret vision, right? Interprets all parts of our vision, including things like color, right? We have certain receptors in our eyes that bring that signal to our brain, and our occipital lobe is where that's processed. Things like light, so we have lightness and darkness, all that gradation. I'm also going to pause the chat here. Sorry, guys. Gradation, because colors and light are actually a different thing. Like I know on Microsoft Paint or whatever, I don't know if you guys still use that, I feel old now, but on the computer, I bet that you can pick different parts. You have like a whole gradation off of square where there's like light and dark and different colors, but in reality, color and light are two separate things. Whether it's light blue or dark blue is light and dark are different from blue versus green, and they also include movement, right? The edges of things changing location is essentially how we perceive movement. Okay, so last thing on our list is let's look at the temporal lobe. So you guys, give me your best guess for what the temporal lobe does. Temporal lobe, that's the green one in this picture. It's going to be on the sides of your head right here. It's going to be right behind your ears, which might give you a little bit of a hint. So let's get some guesses going on. People are saying temperature, some people are saying hearing, some people are saying memory, some people are saying anger, interesting. So it seems like we have a lot of different options here. Somebody said going to the bathroom. All right. Breaking, sense of time, no thinking, interesting. All right, so there's a lot of different, ideas on what it could do here. And so I'm gonna pause the chat for now. All right, so let's go ahead to our temporal lobe. So there's a couple different things that the temporal lobe does. So one thing that it does is it helps understand language. There's a thing called Wernicke's area, and you don't need to memorize that, but if you ever take a psychology class in high school, you're probably going to learn it. Wernicke's area is a special part of your brain that helps understand language. And so that's an important part of the temporal lobe. It's important for processing language. And with that, there's two other things that are related to language: memory and hearing. I guess all the things below, the rest of the bullet points, all also relate to understanding language. So memory, a lot of memory is held in your temporal lobe. Yeah. So, when I think about, if I'm recalling like my mom's cooking or whatever, when I get really hungry, that memory is coming from my temporal lobe. And other things like hearing as well, which is important in understanding language. That was my little hint. Your ears are here, and your temporal lobes are right next to your ears, in between your ears. And it helps you process hearing. So it takes that auditory input and translates it in your brain to something you can understand as a thought, as opposed to just random vibrations that are entering your brain. And another thing that's important for understanding language in particular is the idea of sequencing and organization. So, that's really important when we think about like grammar in a sentence or the kinds of words we use in a sentence. And this goes for language and processing auditory information, or just any kind of thought. Sequencing and organization occurs in your temporal lobe, and it's very important for any kind of organized thinking that you're doing. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide here. All right, you know what? Before we go ahead to that stuff, I just want to review all of the 4 main lobes of the brain. And now that I've given you guys all this information, hopefully you're taking notes, I'm going to quiz you guys. Okay, I'm going to give you a real quick little quiz. I'm going to open up the chat. And so now I want you guys to remind me, what does the frontal lobe do? Frontal lobe. Give me your thoughts on the frontal lobe. Not getting a ton of answers. Okay, personality, decisions, thinking process. Good, yeah, process, emotions, behavior, personality, behavioral emotions. Yeah, you guys, that's awesome. Good. Thinking, concentrating, lovely. You guys totally got it. Okay, what about the parietal lobe? What does the parietal lobe do? Parietal lobe. Yeah, the parietal lobe interprets a lot of our senses, things like vision and hearing and our sensory input and touch and pain and things like that. Good. And what about our occipital lobe? What does our occipital lobe do? Our occipital lobe has one really important function. Occipital, so it's all the way at the back of your head here. Vision, yeah, most people are saying vision and color and light. One thing I haven't really been seeing, but is important, is movement, right? It perceives movement. So our occipital lobe takes in a bunch of different kinds of visual input, which include color and light and motion. Those are the really 3 ingredients for our sense of vision. Good. And what about the temporal lobe? The temporal lobes, what do you guys think? Good. I'm hearing a lot of language and memory and hearing. That's good. That's lovely. Perfect, guys. Language, memory, and hearing. Good. And one other thing is like organization and sequencing. Right, so the temporal lobes are really important for our language processing. And you can remember the other 3 things by thinking about what's involved in language processing, right? We need to hear things. We need to hear the language. We need to remember our knowledge of language. We need to remember how to associate those sounds with meaning. So that's memory. And then we have to include our idea of sequencing and organization to process language, because language comes from pattern. Good. All right, you guys did a really great job. And actually, before we move on even further, let's do a quick review of the cerebellum and the brainstem. So what does the cerebellum do? Cerebellum. Hit me. What do you think? Do you remember? Look back at your notes and tell me what you guys think. Balance, actions. Yeah, let's flip back to our slide here. Cerebellum. Yeah, coordinates movements and maintains posture and balance. And what about our brainstem? Anybody think they know what the brainstem does? What's the brainstem's role here? Yeah, connection. It's the relay center. Perfect. You guys really got this. It's the relay center, and it does some automatic functions like controls your breathing and your heart rate and your temperature and your involuntary responses to things like sneezing and coughing and vomiting. All right. And what about, let's review our left brain and right brain. So what does our right brain do? What does our right brain do? Just quizzing you guys here. Yeah, our right brain's all like creative and stuff, controls the left side of our body, really does creative functions like art and music and all these nebulous artistic skills. What about our left brain? Controls the right side of our body. Perfect, y'all. Good. And logical stuff like speech and math and writing and those things. Yeah, you guys totally got it. And what is the thing called that connects the two hemispheres of our brain. This is a challenging one because I know it's a pretty big vocab word, but if you wrote it down, like I hope you're doing, you should be able to figure it out. What is the thing that connects the two hemispheres of our brain? All right, a few people are getting it. Pranav, Adya, Miriam, Jalen, Vikram, Evan, Mira, Fleming, Disha. You guys got it. It's the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects the two parts of our brain. And it's important because, it relays messages from one side of the brain to another, which are important in basically all thinking, but also really important when doing whole body movements. Good, guys. It seems like you guys have remembered some stuff, or at least you're taking very good notes, which helps you remember stuff. Alrighty then. So let's move on to the next part of our slide. We're almost done here. These are going to be really the last 4 slides. So we're coming to the end now, and I'll take some questions at the very end. So brain makeup now. So we're moving past breaking down our brain into different bits, but now we're thinking about the different layers of the brain. And so there's a lot of big words in this diagram, but you don't really need to look at all of them. This diagram is really here for your viewing pleasure, because what we're going to think about is the cortex of the brain, and the cortex is going to be the darker line out here. You see that orange portion that like kind of outlines the white portion. That's the cortex of your brain. So let's talk about what the cortex is. So the cortex is the surface of, hope I wrote cerebellum, I meant cerebrum right there. I gotta fix that. But it's the surface of the cerebrum. Sorry guys, I'm gonna fix that right now. That's a typo. I don't want to confuse you guys and have you take the wrong notes. Oops. Let me just change this really quick. Yeah, so it is, different slide, is the surface of the cerebrum. Almost made that mistake. Cerebrum, cerebellum, not quite the same. It has this folded appearance, and I saw a funny little comment earlier. Someone said, "Is it true that if you have more folds in your brain, that means you're smarter?" I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it's kind of on the right idea, right? Because the reason that we need that folded appearance of the brain is because it allows it to have more neurons, and having more neurons, well, neurons are the things that help you think. The cortex alone has 16 billion neurons. That's a huge number, right? Humans can't even process numbers that big. 16 billion neurons in the cortex alone, just in that little, just in this dark space here, just in this orangey space, not even counting the white space. There are 16 billion neurons. And the cortex is what we call gray matter, right? If you look back at this picture, you see how it's darker than the rest of the brain. In this picture it's orange, but actually in reality it does look kind of gray on brain scans, and so we call it gray matter. And that's because the bodies of the neurons, the cell bodies, the really dense part that have important bits, are very concentrated in the cortex, very concentrated, and give that visually darker appearance. And then right under the cortex we have the cortex connections, which are long nerve fibers connecting the different brain areas. And that's what we call white matter. So let's look back at our picture here. This lighter part, that's going to be called white matter. And this is just connecting different parts of the brain. So we have our cortex, which is the orangey part here, and the white part underneath is called white matter, and that's connections. The reason it's lighter is because it has more long cell, what are called axons, instead of cell bodies. So it's less darkly colored. And that's our white matter. And so the reason we have brain folds is because it increases the surface area of our brain, and more surface area means more cortex, and more cortex means more concentrated neurons, and more neurons gives you a better brain and lets you think more. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation for today. I know we have 10 minutes left of class, and I've reserved that time to take some questions, okay? So if you have we have a lot of people in this class, so I'm not gonna be able to get to everybody's question. But if you have a really, really good question, then you can put it in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer it for you. Okay, what is a sulcus? So a sulcus is an important blood vessel in your brain, and usually in your cerebral lobe. But you guys don't really need to know about that. That's a little complicated. What makes brain freezes? I think that's just when you eat too much cold stuff. Let's see. Are there more lobes more than the ones we talked about today? So those are the 4 lobes. Those are the 4 brain lobes. However, there's only 4 lobes, but there's different parts of those lobes, right? We talked about Broca's area and Wernicke's area, and there's a lot more small parts of the brain that have been identified like this. The motor strip. So the motor strip is a part of the frontal lobe that helps control action. Let's see, what is the gray and white matter responsible for? That's a really good question. So the gray and white matter aren't responsible for a particular function. They're just part of the makeup of the brain. Let's see, does the brain actually freeze? Oh, some people are asking me to go back to a couple slides. So, I'll do that for you guys. Let's see, let me open the chat one more time. I'm going to go back to the slide about the lobes, so you guys can write those down if you missed it. Yes, we will go back to we're going to learn about all the different parts of the brain. Don't worry about that. We don't worry about 4 more days of this class, so you guys will learn about all the different parts of the brain. Which part of the brain most matters? Well, it's a hard question because basically as you build from the back of your brain all the way to the front, it becomes more complex. However, that also means that the really important parts for your survival are kind of more in the back of your brain. So I'd say basically every part of your brain matters almost equally. Someone said, I don't think I can memorize all of this. That's okay. You don't have to memorize all of it. I just want you guys to familiarize yourself with these ideas. Let's see. Is your heart more important or your brain? I think they're both important. They're both important. It's hard to compare the two. Let's see. What's the sensory strip? The sensory strip is part of your parietal lobe. This just helps with sensing. Your parietal lobe does a lot for sensing different parts, different functions, different inputs that you get in your body. And yeah. So let's see. What side controls the emotions? It's not really one or two sides. It's like your different parts of your brain control emotions differently. Let's see. Can you go to the cerebellum, the cortex slide? Yeah, I can go to the cortex slide. Yeah, so this is our cortex here. So what is white matter, and why is it so big? So the white matter is basically connections from different parts of your brain. The gray matter is the really dense part, and the white matter is the connection part of the axons. Okay, let's see. What is the Wernicke area? So the Wernicke area is just a part that helps process language. You guys don't need to know that much detail. So this is explaining what the cortex is. Let's see. How do I get more neurons in your brain? Well, they're going to grow. You guys are young and your brains are still growing, so you're naturally going to get more neurons. How many neurons are in the brain? Billions, like billions and billions and billions and billions of neurons are in your brain. Is the brain actually squishy? Yes, it is. Brains are squishy. What makes brains so hot? Our whole bodies are kept very warm. Does the brain actually freeze? No, it does not actually freeze. Let's see. Can you go back to the picture of the brain? Yeah, I can go back to the picture of the brain. Let's hear it. This one's a good one. This is the picture of the brain that I like the most. That's the slide with all the brain lobes and the names. Someone asked when the next class is. It's going to be tomorrow at the same time as today. We have our classes for the rest of this week. Is the brain pink? Yes, brains are pink. At least at first they are, because of all the blood vessels. What is a neuron? Well, we're going to talk about that later. So I'll save that for another class. Have I ever touched a brain? I have not ever touched a brain. I will eventually because I do want to go to medical school. So I'm going to have to touch a brain in a class one day. Let's see. When you're a baby, how many neurons do you have? That's a really good question. I don't know the answer. I'm guessing at least several billion, but you definitely develop more as you get older. What is Broca's area? Another language processing area. Is everyone's brain pattern different or the same? That's a really good question. So generally, humans have very similar brain patterns, but there is natural variation on a smaller level between individuals. Are headaches dangerous? Not always, but sometimes they can be an indicator of different things like tumors, for example, or an underlying health condition. Let's see, so many messages. Oh boy, let's see. A lot of questions. Oh boy. Okay. So the older you are, the more neurons you have. Not necessarily, right? You gain more neurons as you grow, right? But then once you hit a certain age, you start generating more neurons, and they start to die, and you actually have fewer neurons after a certain part. Can you lose neurons? Yes, you can. A lot of people get brain injuries and lose neurons. What are benefits of neurons? So neurons, neurons basically allow your brain to function. Your brain is just made of neurons. Will your brain grow when you get bigger? Yeah, your brain does grow as you get bigger up to a certain age. Do animals have brains? Yes, they do. Someone said to go back to see what's in. So this is another slide I think people liked. This is another slide of the diagram of the brain. Do neurons die? Yes, neurons do die eventually. Okay, I'll take one more question. Okay, this is a great one. To what age do our brains grow? Okay, so our brains keep developing up to actually pretty late in life, and scientists are still trying to figure it out. But most scientists think that our brains reach final maturity between ages 22 and 25, right? So you guys definitely have a long way to go in terms of brain development. Even I do, right? I'm 21, and my brain's probably not fully developed yet, okay? All right, so that's going to be the end of class for today. I gave you guys a lot of content. I hope you guys enjoyed today's class. Hopefully you guys are about to go eat dinner. Go tell your parents some fun facts that you learned today at dinner. Tell them how excited you are to learn all about the brain. And I will talk to you guys again at the same time tomorrow, okay? Bye.